All right, so for this one here, this is 2 of 2 for one of our Idaho 4 stories in the Idaho 4 universe.
Dr. Moore Part 2.
Dr. Moore Part 2. So number 1, I will post here. If you guys haven't watched this, I suggest that you go watch it now before this one, okay? Because we're going to start digging right into this one. We're going to dig right into the crime that happened that caused what we talked about here. So on episode 1, we went through who Dr. Moore is, who the Moores are, and what the situation is, and what ultimately came from that situation. Now, this is going to be based on the crime itself, okay? Not centered around Dr. Moore and his experience, but the crime that the police that were involved in this and also involved in the Idaho 4 case said Dr. Moore was a part of, all right? And a lot of this is going to be read from the official court documents, because this reads like a story, and this document is the document that Dr. Moore submitted when bringing a case against all of these officers.
A lawsuit, right?
He did, yep. First he proved his innocence, and then he filed the lawsuit against all of them. So
good.
Real quick, we'll go through who we're talking about again, right? And this is in the city of Bonners Ferry, and it involves Brian Zimmerman, which is the chief of police, Martin Ryan, which is the assistant chief of police, Michael Van Leuven, and Gary Tolson, which is Idaho State police officers that are like subcontracted to Bonners Ferry, and then there are a couple other officers that are unnamed in here, and really they aren't important to the case. Who's important to the case is one, Brian Zimmerman, Martin Ryan as the chief and assistant chief of police, because anytime you have officers or a situation going awry, stuff rolls upwards, crap rolls uphill. So,
and it was Zimmerman and Van Leuven, the Idaho State policemen, who were also
Tolson and Van Leuven.
Yeah, oh my bad. Tolson and Van Leuven that were also working in Moscow on the Idaho 4 case.
That is correct. And on this video 1, we went through some of the correlating facts that are so similar to Idaho 4, right? And Tolson was a key player in the Idaho 4 conviction. So it's very interesting stuff. But
indictment, the charges, the investigation.
Yep. So the crime itself here, the crime and ending of Dr. Brian Drake, aka Dr. Drake. So who is he? Dr. Drake was a practicing chiropractor who lived in Hayden, Idaho with his wife, Jennifer Drake, and their 4 children. Dr. Drake worked alone with offices in which he saw patients in Hayden, Sandpoint, and Bonners Ferry, Idaho. And it's interesting. Why would a doctor travel all these places? Well, it talks about that a little bit later. During the period that included the early months During the period that included the early months of 2020, Dr. Drake would spend approximately 2 nights per week in Bonners Ferry, where he would see patients and spend the night away from his family in Hayden. It's about 71 miles away. During one such trip to Bonners Ferry on March 12, 2020, not long after seeing his last patients of the evening, Dr. Drake was shot through the window of his office, struck with a bullet in the back, causing his death, okay? And that crime right there, that shooting, that one shot to the back that ended him, is what Dr. Moore was convicted of. Fingers pointed at him, evidence manipulated in a very similar way to, we don't know that the Idaho 4 evidence was manipulated. It just was
reminiscent.
Yes, it was brought up in a way that just makes you wonder. There's a lot of people out there that wonder. And again, I'm always going to say this with the Idaho 4 case, starting every video. We do not care that Brian Kohberger is innocent or guilty. We have no buy-in there. What we're focusing on is a fair trial to find out if Bryan Kohberger is the guy or not. Personally, I want him to be the guy, because if he's not, the real killer is out there. The real killer is free. The real killer could do it again, and that is terrifying.
And the corruption. I mean, the corruption, too. The real killer's still being out there. The corruption that probably took place to get Bryan Kohberger charged.
Yeah, the corruption takes a back seat for more people being ended.
Of course, safety, the public safety, absolutely. It does take a back seat for that.
Yeah. So I hope Bryan Kohberger is the guy, but right now the evidence doesn't look like that. There are so many red flags, and there are so many flags that are very similar to what went on here. So, all right, going back here.
Yep.
During we just talked about that. Dr. Drake's. So we just covered Dr. Drake got shot in the back on March 12th of 2020, right after seeing his last patients, okay? So Dr. Drake's office was situated approximately 16 feet from a building to the southwest known as the Far North Coffee Lodge. The space between Dr. Drake's office and the Far North Coffee Lodge was utilized as a drive-through window for the coffee shop. The Far North Coffee Lodge was owned and or operated by defendant Ryan. Ryan's brother-in-law and Ryan's wife worked at the coffee shop's drive-through window.
That's right.
Assistant Chief
Ryan
Zimmerman is tied to the coffee shop that is 16 feet away from the window where the bullet went through and hit this guy. Dude.
Very strange.
It is super strange. We are not trying to say that he did it or had anything to do with it, but the only option here is that bullet came from that coffee shop, or it came from the 16 feet difference in between the two. And his brother-in-law and wife were working there. Red flag, right? At least to ask more questions.
You know, I read in an article that, I don't know if this is mentioned in there, but that Dr. Drake was on the phone with his wife at the time he was killed. Does it talk about that in there? Because I didn't remember that detail.
It does. So his time of death is the same time that phone call happened. So I believe he had just hung up or was on the call just getting ready to hang up.
Well, she did an interview and she claimed she was on the phone with him.
Oh, then that's probably what happened. Probably what happened. But who knows, looking at some of the evidence. So back to what we were saying here. While Ryan's brother-in-law and his wife would naturally have some information about Dr. Drake and his business and patients coming and going from his offices, no investigative interviews of these witnesses were supplied to Dr. Moore's defense team. Interesting. So they chose not to question or talk to the shop owner and the shop's owner, Ryan's wife that works there.
His wife and
in this situation.
His brother or brother-in-law.
His brother-in-law. Now, in any murder case, you talk to everybody.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And you would think they would be very credible witnesses.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So I have a feeling that some people might look at this and be like, well, of course they didn't. Like, they have a close relationship with law enforcement. No, that would make you want to talk to them because they are credible.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, in a positive situation,
exactly.
Right? But they weren't. It's like they were protected, okay? Dr. Drake, which interesting, Dr. Drake saw his last patients on March 12th, 2020. Eldra Gatchel and her brother Caleb Kakoa Nazara around 7:17 p.m. that night. Timestamps from Dr. Drake and his wife's telephone conversation made by Drake after his patients left establish that Drake was shot approximately at 7:26 p.m. Eldra Eldra Gatchel and Caleb Kikoa-Nazaro would report seeing a two-toned white, this is important, two-toned white and tan Ford-style pickup truck near Drake's office building when they were leaving. So remember that two-toned pickup truck. Dr. Moore's vehicle at the time of Dr. Drake's shooting death was an all-white, four-door 2019 Toyota Tundra. In his sworn affidavit for probable cause to search Dr. Moore's residence, storage unit, business, and vehicles, and also to establish probable cause to charge him with second-degree murder, Van Leuven would not accurately describe the patient's description of the pickup truck as a two-toned white and tan Ford-style pickup truck. Instead, Van Leuven described it as simply a white, large pickup truck, so that the description would match the description of Dr. Moore's all-white Toyota Tundra pickup truck. We talked about that on episode 1. So the officers intentionally manipulated first-hand statements and witness accounts to match their version of accounts. So he went on he made a statement, a legal statement in court saying this is what was said and this is what connected him, and it wasn't true. It was not true, and it was verified. So eyewitnesses describe, and we talked about this too, a running man, and do not identify Moore in a lineup. There were 2 eyewitnesses where a shot happened. They look over. It is a husband and wife couple. See this man running away. Get a good enough look at him to see his skin tone, his hair color, his hair type, his height, and that he was running fast away from the scene. If you guys remember, Dr. Moore couldn't run. He had a knee injury that made it impossible for him to run. And I mean, look at this man. He's an older man. He does not look in running shape to me, but he literally couldn't run. It's impossible.
Yeah, a lot of chiropractors are in pretty good shape, but the injury and being an older man, yeah, it makes sense.
And the officers stuffed and hid those eyewitness accounts and statements too, because they didn't match what they wanted the charges to be and who to beat on. So
shady.
Yeah, and those eyewitnesses literally looked at a picture lineup with Dr. Moore in it, and both of them separately did not pick Dr. Moore out.
So totally independent of each other.
Totally independent of each other. An eyewitness named Isaac Funderburg was outside his apartment in Bonners Ferry when he reported the 911 call, having heard a gunshot across the street, the location of Drake's office. Funderburg reported seeing an adult male dressed in dark-colored clothing walking northwest from between Dr. Drake's building and a fence on the north side of the building immediately after hearing the shot. The figure he saw reminded him of a clerk he knew from a local gas station, a description wholly inconsistent with Dr. Moore's appearance. When Funderburg yelled, "Hey, was that you?" referring to the gunshot, he saw this person run away toward a business located not far from Dr. Moore's office. This guy got a close enough eyewitness account of this guy to say that he looked like a gas station clerk that had helped him at one time. And they still go with Dr. Moore.
What the heck?
Yeah.
Why would a gas station clerk want to kill Dr. Drake? That's so weird.
Right? I have no clue. Who knows if that's even true? Right. And it was that guy, but it reminded him of it. Yeah. So Funderburg's fiancée, Aaliyah Sandelin, also heard the shot and observed the figure running away to the northeast also. Funderburg and Sandelin were later each shown a photographic lineup that contained Dr. Moore's photograph. Neither identified Dr. Moore as the person they saw running away from the scene of the shooting of Drake. Indeed, their description of the running man was a person with different skin, different hair color, and entirely different stature. Crime scene evidence. The scene of Dr. Drake's murder established that he had been shot through the window of his office in his back, and his body was found on the floor of his office. The bullet fired came from the direction and location of the far north coffee shop near the shop's drive-through window. Dr. Drake's phone was recovered, and the call times with his wife confirmed. And what a good alibi You know what I mean? What?
His
I wasn't
wife?
there. I was on the phone with
That
him.
is
What are you talking about?
exactly what I was thinking,
I know.
dude.
I know.
I have just this...
I think anyone would think that because it's so obvious. Like,
I
oh
know.
my God.
I have this inkling that she's involved, guys.
So, and you'll know why in
We'll
a
get
second.
to it,
Yep.
yeah.
So, inside Dr. Drake's vehicle parked at his business was his gym bag containing a bottle of vodka that had been partially consumed. Dr. Drake's blood alcohol content, as determined by his autopsy toxicology report, was 0.081, over the legal limit to legally drive an automobile in the state of Idaho. Alibi witness Mick Mellett. During their investigation, law enforcement, and we talked about this last time, law enforcement spoke with Dr. Moore 2 times prior to calling him into their office for a custodial interrogation where they forced him to interrogate. That's what we talked about. So
Yeah,
so deep and in depth on that last episode. Dr. Moore disclosed that he had spent the evening of March 12, 2020, with his close friend and the Boundary County coroner, Mick Mellett. On May 19, 2020, ISP detectives Alderson and Van Leuven interviewed Mick Mellett, who confirmed that the Moores were close friends and spent time at his home frequently. Further, Mr. Mellett confirmed that Dr. Moore was at his home on the evening of Dr. Drake's shooting from at least 6:15 p.m. until around 8:30 p.m. after the shooting had occurred. After charging Dr. Moore with second-degree murder, Ryan, the assistant chief, confronted Mick Mellett in a hostile way about having provided an alibi for Dr. Moore's whereabouts on the evening of Dr. Drake's murder. Ryan, and remember, Ryan's connected to that coffee shop, you guys.
Yep,
Ryan,
he is.
Ryan suggested that Mellett's alibi was causing people in law enforcement community to not want to work with him in his professional capacity as county coroner. This contact was egregiously designed to harass and dissuade Mr. Mellett from providing an alibi for Dr. Moore and violated the laws of the state of Idaho, which prohibit efforts to intimidate witnesses to prevent their testifying in criminal proceedings. Okay, a couple stats here before we go on. Around 30% of all murders are family murders, okay? That includes any kind of family member, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, okay? Now, out of all family murders, because that 30% is really the only statistic we need to focus on with this here. The other 70 are completely different. They're like walk-up robbing, situational, not family members. 75% of murders who were classified as family murders were a husband to a wife to a husband, a boyfriend to a girlfriend, or a girlfriend to a boyfriend. That is so much, you guys. That means 3 out of every 4 family-style murders are the husband to the wife to the husband, boyfriend to the girlfriend to the boyfriend. Yes, the partner, okay? That's important in this, I think. So, the Drake family and Jennifer Drake. At the time of Drake's death, his family was suffering financial hardship. One of the main reasons we see this stuff happening. Was suffering financial hardship resulting from Dr. Drake's inability to meet the family's expenses with his business income. At or near the time of Drake's tragic death, the Drake family had resorted to seeking financial assistance from their church. At the time of Dr. Drake's death, Dr. Drake had developed an alcohol dependence which greatly distressed his wife, Jennifer. The Drake marriage had also suffered some setbacks relating to inappropriate conduct by Dr. Drake. The Drake family had moved to Idaho from Austin, Texas after Dr. Drake had inappropriate contact with female patients in Austin. This female patient, through her legal counsel, had made a demand for payment for the injuries Dr. Drake had caused her and threatened legal action. Dr. Drake attempted to resolve this dispute on his own and offered money to the female patient to resolve the dispute. That, in my opinion, proves guilt, but who, I don't know those details. We can look them up
Yeah.
later. Jennifer Drake had also discovered other conduct by her husband that involved a serious violation of her trust. Jennifer Drake had secured a $1 million life insurance policy covering the life of her husband, Brian Drake, prior to Dr. Drake's death, and said the policy was in effect when Drake was shot. Interesting.
It is interesting.
Prior to starting his own business, Dr. Drake had previously practiced with other chiropractors in the Hayden and Coeur d'Alene area. Upon information and belief, left those practices after inappropriate physical contact with a female staff member at one of the offices and pursuant to a dispute he had with one of the managing chiropractors at another office. Jennifer Drake reported to law enforcement that she believed one local chiropractor with whom Dr. Drake had worked previously was the likely shooter because her husband had taken several of the chiropractor's patients when Dr. Drake left the practice to open his own practice, okay?
Wait, left the practice? So that's what I was asking you before. They work together?
No, she's not saying Dr. Moore here. She's saying she believes that it was another chiropractor. Because he had bounced around to so many different offices, she told police that she believes it was another chiropractor. Where she got this information, who knows? This is a wild statement to make, and it's even wilder that police took her information.
Yeah.
A grieving wife took her information and ran with it.
Well, no, they will take a statement from the wife and say, like, did your husband have
That's not what it was,
have
though.
any enemies?
That
But
is not what it was.
To say it's a chiropractor because he bounced around offices and was making more money in his own practice, that is
not
nuts.
even making more money, that he was taking some of their patients.
Yeah, that's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever
I
heard
agree.
in my
She's
life.
not law enforcement. She is not law enforcement. The only information you should use is information that you gain through a conversation, interrogation, investigation. One of those. You don't take personal text messages from a grieving wife, potentially grieving wife, and run with those.
Yeah.
What is wrong here?
Yeah.
This was the theme ISP, so Idaho State Police, and BFPD, Bonners Ferry Police Department, would pursue at Jennifer Drake's insistence, rather than pursuing Jennifer Drake as a suspect. Notwithstanding the potential for Jennifer Drake's involvement in the death of her husband, law enforcement failed to competently investigate her as a suspect. And remember those stats, right? 75% of all family murders are husband to wife, wife to husband, boyfriend to girlfriend, girlfriend to boyfriend.
Yeah.
Rather than competently investigate Jennifer Drake as a potential suspect in her husband's death, defendants provided her details of the investigation, including engaging in regular text messages with her on their personal phones and following the leads she proposed they follow, including the lead that the person who killed her husband was likely another chiropractor who lost patients and business to her husband.
See, that is what really seals the deal for me. It's the life insurance. Okay, it's the fact that they had financial troubles. She secured a life insurance policy. She gives the tip and is personally texting law enforcement.
So, I agree with you. That is very obvious. And before I go forward, I just want to make a statement here. My goal in this is not to make Brian Drake look bad, okay? But we have a responsibility on our channel, in our community, to give facts, okay? These are legal contracts. That this is not my opinion. This is what was submitted to the courts and the grand jury to get more off and then get this lawsuit going. This is directly from that. And I'm reading this for that reason because I didn't want to make him look bad. I didn't want it to seem like I'm trying to victim blame or anything like that, okay? These were just... He was a normal man with some issues, going through some problems, okay? My question is, did Dr. Drake agree to this?
Of being killed?
He had a blood alcohol level of too high to drive. He was perfectly standing in front of that window. Did he put his family, 4 kids, you guys, which is a relatively big family, okay, 4 children and a wife, that he lost all their money from sleeping around with other people, having 2 forward of contact with other women he worked with multiple times here, over and over and over.
Right?
Patients and people he worked with. It was 4 different times here, 4 separate. 3 of them were people he worked with. 1 of them was a patient that came after him financially. Did he feel bad in this situation, and did he help conspire to try and get his family out of trouble?
Like, if I can get them a fat payout, then they're better off without me and they'll be okay. And
Yes.
interesting. I never even thought of that.
I just thought about it a few days ago, and I was like, I wonder,
Then why not let the case go cold or something? Why pin it on another man who's like living his nice little life? And
so I wish I could have details to their life insurance policy, but I believe there are some policies out there that say in a murder you don't get paid out until there's a suspect, or you've been deemed cleared completely. And the only way to be deemed cleared is for there to be a suspect and conviction, okay?
So I think it's different. Like, the policies can be different for each company.
They can.
But I think some of them may even require the case to be closed.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. I've heard of all of those things. But, okay, so I don't want to try and solve this because, again, my goal isn't to put these people down. But do I think there's some major red flags here? And me, not being a trained police officer, not being a trained investigator, and not being a trained specialist, if I can look at this and question whether Jennifer should be a suspect or not, and very clearly should have been approached as a suspect, at least investigated, why didn't ISP and BDFP, or, BFPD, I'm sorry. Why, dude? Why?
I don't know. That's my main issue in it, obviously, is the fact that the police department, like, even if she did plan it with her husband, like, why did they just take her little weird theory she came up with and run with it?
I don't know.
And then frame somebody.
And the business being 16 feet away that is directly tied to the assistant chief of police. That is so strange, you guys. One of our theories when we've talked about this before was Jennifer Drake hooking up with an officer?
Yeah, because
was she hooking up with Ryan?
Texting them on their private phones.
Yep.
So
she was.
I was about to say that was my theory, was that she was hooking up with him.
The only thing is Ryan's tied to that, and Ryan's wife works there, so they're married. Could there be a love triangle? Sure, there could always be a love triangle. But was Ryan tied into this somehow with another officer? Because we have 4 officers at least, with 2 unnamed, 4 total named, 2 unnamed, that were involved in forcing this charge down Dr. Moore's throat. When he very clearly, you guys, after hearing these 2 things, like, I need your opinion, but reading this, it is so clear to me that he was nowhere near there. An elected county official, gave him an alibi. He was with him during the crime. We have truck manipulation. It went from a 2-tone to a white large truck. We have burying eyewitness accounts, 4 total. We have lineups that were buried. We have they forced it on Dr. Moore. Did they do that to get the insurance payout, knowing Dr. Moore would get off? That really all they cared about was making a conviction, and then didn't care if it got turned back over. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
what do you think?
I was almost questioning if a police officer did it, like literally killed Drake for the money, like she made some kind of deal, or they were hooking up, and then she was like, hey, like, we could be rich, or like, I don't know. I was just thinking of several theories like that, but that is my question too, is why Dr. Moore? Why go through all that trouble of pinning it on this man and manipulating the evidence and witness tampering and witness intimidating and everything they did, even after the fact, stalking his business after he was exonerated. Like, we know he didn't do this. He was exonerated. They provided exculpatory evidence. And now he's suing them with all of this evidence. So that's been my hang up the whole time, is the why.
I agree. And so now tying this back to the Idaho 4 case, 2 of these officers, ISP officers, the Idaho State Police, were involved with the Idaho 4 case. One of them was a very key investigator, one of the lead investigators who chose who to talk to, when to talk to him, what tips were credible, what tips weren't, what we needed to search, what evidence we needed to gather, what evidence we didn't, what needed to be sent in, what didn't. Like, you guys, one investigator, you guys, can make or break an entire case. The entire thing. There's this idea in the Idaho 4 case that there's some big grand conspiracy. I personally, I see how people think that, and I respect it, and I understand why people think that. But in a lot of cases, we can see one person can create a huge pile of crap. One investigator can create a massive conspiracy-esque looking situation, because all it takes is one person not to be honest, one person to manipulate evidence, one person to pretend they found a photo of somebody's car during this time.
And it poisons the rest of the investigation.
And it poisons everything, because we also deal with blue blood, and officers want to trust other officers because of trauma bonding and being in horrible life-threatening situations, and they're your fellow police brothers, and that goes all the way up the chain. And then you have the prosecution in the state who needs to back the police department, so they trust everything they say no matter what, until they're in a situation where we see in court with Anne and then the prosecution, and the prosecution is in a situation where they're like, look, I don't even want to tell you why we did this thing with the cameras here, and there isn't 3 other DNA profiles, even though it clearly shows and proves that there was other DNA. You know what I mean? Like, one person can start this snowball to where it now becomes damage management from all levels. And I think it's important to know that the person that created this major pile of junk was a key investigator in the Idaho 4 potentially major pile of junk.
But
again, we
potentially
try really hard not to go tin hat, you guys, because it usually isn't tin hat. It usually is somewhere in between the mainstream story and tin hat. It usually falls somewhere in between. So we try to stay logical. We try to stay unbiased, and we try to stay somewhere in between those opinions. And I think with the Idaho 4 case, almost everyone is slowly seeing this fall apart. We were promised slam dunk. There isn't slam dunk. So what is up?
Yeah, I find it really interesting now, the ex-investigators, all these people coming out saying there's holes. Like this,
big time.
This is basically an open investigation. Like, the evidence is not good.
The FBI doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. They're continuing to say, look, we didn't have anything to do with this investigation. We just supported the evidence that was given to us. But I would love to know what you guys think about it, how you feel about this. Am I way off base here? Do we see do you think that these behaviors are repeatable behaviors, and we're seeing them repeated in the Idaho case? Like, is there meat on the bone here? Is this something we should be digging deeper into? I personally think all information needs to be looked at. It just depends on how deep we think these types of behaviors and practices go with the Idaho 4.
I mean, if Tolson is capable of doing this amount of corruption and framing an innocent man, I do not put put it past him to do it again.
Not just a random innocent man, a really great
Outstanding
person
citizen.
in their town and citizen and
father
interweaved into their town and supporting the town. And his wife was a nurse that supported children. They had their own children that played with the other, children and Ryan's kids and all this stuff. So
sad.
It is so sad, you guys. And I need your input here. I want your opinion. I want to know how you feel about it. I want to know what you think about it. Let those thoughts riot below in the comments.
Yeah.